Barack Obama walked into a congressional hearing room expecting an easy victory lap, but Tulsi Gabbard was waiting with a cardboard box that would obliterate his scandal-free legacy forever. 7 words, handwritten in the margin of a CIA briefing note dated the 28th of July, 2016. The handwriting wasn't the CIA director's. It was a summary of the president's verbal response, recorded by John Brennan during the briefing, annotated right there in his own notes. Barack Obama's response, the exact response that had been redacted from every declassified version for 8 long years. Classified, sealed, withheld from Congress, withheld from the public, withheld from the FISA court. That is, until Tulsi Gabbard, the combat veteran whose government put her on a terrorist watch list just for speaking on television, read it out loud in a congressional hearing room, and the 44th President of the United States was sitting just 12 feet away. Obama's face didn't change. His hands didn't move. He sat in his gallery chair exactly the way he had sat through 1,000 events. Composed, measured, presidential, even in civilian clothes, but something behind his eyes, something that had been performing absolute composure for 30 years, something that powered a career built on the belief that eloquence could outrun evidence, went dark. What happened next would end the myth of his scandal-free presidency. And it started 6 hours earlier. It was a Wednesday morning in June. The hearing was titled Oversight of the Intelligence Community's Domestic Surveillance Programs. The House Judiciary Committee hearing room in the Rayburn Building had been completely packed since 7:00 a.m. That is 90 minutes before the first gavel, an hour before the witness arrived, and 2 full hours before anyone outside the Democratic caucus leadership knew that the 44th president would be in the room. Barack Obama entered through the main gallery door at 9:35 a.m., flanked by 2 Secret Service agents and a former senior aide who now worked at his foundation. He had on a charcoal gray suit. No tie. That no-tie look had become his post-presidency uniform. It was the visual message that he was no longer bound by the office, but still carried all of its gravity. His hair was grayer than it was during his presidency, but the walk was exactly the same, unhurried, confident. The walk of a man who had entered 1,000 rooms and owned every single one of them. The gallery recognized him immediately. A murmur swept the room. Not the surprised murmur of people who didn't expect him, but the reverential murmur of people who had been told he was coming and still weren't prepared for the physical reality of a former president walking through a door. Democratic members on the committee dais half stood up. A junior representative from California actually put her hand over her heart, an involuntary gesture of someone encountering a figure they had only ever seen on screens. Obama moved through the gallery the way he always moved, touching arms, nodding, offering the half-smile that won 2 presidential elections and a Nobel Prize. He sat in the VIP section, directly behind the witness table, center row, center seat, visible from every camera angle. His presence was the message. Democrats had invited him quietly through back channels, announcing it to the Republican minority only that morning, to serve as a living rebuke to the woman sitting at the witness table. The woman whose career as DNI was built on declassifying the secrets of the intelligence community that Obama oversaw. The woman placed on a terrorist watch list by the surveillance system Obama expanded. The woman who left his party, endorsed his political enemy, and was now running the 18 agencies that Obama considered his greatest institutional legacy. Tulsi Gabbard sat at the witness table. She arrived at 8:15 a.m. alone, except for a staff aide who carried a single box of documents. It wasn't thick. It wasn't impressive. Just a standard file storage box that could have contained anything. She wore a dark navy suit and no jewelry, except a small American flag pin on her lapel. Her hair was pulled back. Her expression was the exact expression she had learned in Iraq. Not blank, not angry, not friendly, just present. The face of someone paying attention to everything and reacting to absolutely nothing. She had seen Obama enter. She didn't stand. She didn't turn. She just watched his reflection in the polished surface of the witness table as water pitcher, a distorted image of a tall man in a gray suit moving through a room that parted for him, and she waited. The chairman called the hearing to order at 1002 a.m. The surprise came 40 minutes in. A Democratic senator from Connecticut, one of the committee's most senior members, finished his questioning of Gabbard about DNI restructuring. Then, instead of yielding his remaining time back to the committee, he turned to the chairman and said, "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield my remaining time to our guest, President Obama, for a brief statement." The hearing room shifted. On the Republican side of the dais, two members exchanged glances. The chairman, a Republican, paused. He consulted with the committee counsel and then nodded. Yielding time to a gallery guest was unusual, but procedurally permissible. There were no grounds to object that wouldn't look like silencing a former president. Obama rose from his gallery seat. The movement was fluid, the movement of an athlete, not a politician. That same kinetic ease that made him the most physically graceful president since Kennedy. He walked to the committee microphone set up in the gallery, not the witness table where Gabbard sat, but a standing microphone at the gallery rail. The positioning was deliberate. Obama stood above the witness table, looking down at Gabbard, the pure geometry of authority. "Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the courtesy." His voice filled the room just like it always had. Resonant, measured, calibrated, the voice that delivered the "Yes, we can" speech and the announcement that Osama bin Laden was dead. Even out of office, even in a committee hearing room, even at a standing mic meant for brief remarks, the voice commanded the room. "I want to address something directly, because I think the American people deserve honesty, not the selective declassification of documents designed to score political points." He looked down at Gabbard. Director Gabbard sits at that table today because of loyalty, not to the Constitution, but to one man. She was placed in this position not because she's qualified to lead 18 intelligence agencies, but because she endorsed the right candidate at the right time. The Democratic side of the dais nodded. On the gallery benches, staffers were recording on their phones. The angles were pre-planned. The moment was pre-staged. "Let's be clear about Director Gabbard's record," Obama continued. "She met with Bashar al-Assad, a dictator who gassed his own people, without State Department authorization. She praised Edward Snowden, a man who stole classified information and fled to Russia. She was placed on a TSA watch list, not for political reasons, but because her travel patterns raised legitimate security concerns that any responsible screening system would flag." Obama's voice softened. Not weaker, but warmer. The shift his speechwriters called the pastoral register. The voice of a man about to say something he wishes he didn't have to say. And now she sits at the head of the intelligence community, declassifying documents not for transparency, but for revenge. Not for the American people, but for an audience of one. He straightened up. "I served as president for 8 years. I protected this country. I oversaw the operation that killed Osama bin Laden, and I did it with an intelligence community that I trusted, because I didn't use it as a weapon. I used it as a shield." He looked at Gabbard one final time. "Director Gabbard, with respect, you are not qualified for the chair you sit in, and the documents you're waving around are not evidence of wrongdoing. They are evidence of a grudge." The Democratic side applauded. Several members stood. The gallery buzzed. Obama walked back to his seat with the exact same unhurried grace, touching an arm, nodding, the half-smile back in place. He sat down. He had just given the performance of his life, and Tulsi Gabbard had not moved an inch. The chairman looked at her. "Director Gabbard, you have the right of response." Gabbard leaned forward and adjusted her microphone. The adjustment produced a small click, the loudest sound in the room. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." She didn't look at Obama. She looked right at the committee. "The former president just said several things about me. I'm not going to address the personal attacks. He's entitled to his opinion about my qualifications. What I am going to address are the facts, because facts are what the intelligence community is supposed to deal in." She reached into the file box beside her chair and removed a document. A single document printed on government letterhead. The former president said my placement on the TSA watch list was because my travel patterns raised legitimate security concerns. I'd like to read from the actual document. She held it up. This is an internal DHS memorandum from the Quiet Skies program manager dated the 24th of July, 2024, requesting my expedited enrollment in the program. It was classified. I obtained it as DNI and have had it reviewed for declassification. She read the justification field, the field that actually explains why a person is placed on the watch list. It read as follows: Subject is a former member of Congress, former presidential candidate, and current political commentator who has made statements critical of the current administration on national television. Subject's travel patterns include frequent domestic flights to media appearances and political events. Gabbard set the document on the table. This memo does not mention terrorism. It does not mention national security. It does not reference any threat assessment, any intelligence report, any law enforcement referral. The justification for placing a 21-year combat veteran on a terrorist watch list was that she criticized the administration on television. She paused. When she spoke again, her voice changed. Not louder, not emotional, but personal. In a way, the military register usually suppresses, "I enlisted in the Hawaii Army National Guard in 2003, Mr. President, 2 years after September 11th. I was 21 years old. I deployed to Iraq in 2004 with a medical unit attached to a field artillery brigade. I earned a combat medical badge. I treated soldiers who had been shot, who had been burned, who were losing blood faster than I could replace it. I went to Kuwait in 2008 as a military police officer. I have served this country in uniform for over 21 years, and the system you built. The domestic surveillance apparatus that expanded under your administration, the Quiet Skies program that was launched in 2010 under your DHS, the SSSS screening protocols that your administration implemented, that system was used to put me on a terrorist watch list because I said something on Fox News that someone in the White House didn't like." She looked at the gallery. "Right at Obama. You just told this committee that my watch list placement was because my travel patterns raised legitimate security concerns. Sir, I travel to give speeches. I travel to appear on television. I travel to visit my family in Hawaii. My husband, Abraham, a cinematographer, not a national security threat, was also placed on the list. Air marshals, federal agents, whose job is to protect commercial flights from actual terrorists, were pulled off high-risk international routes and reassigned to follow me on domestic flights from Nashville to Orlando. For 6 months, every time I walked through an airport, I was pulled aside. Every item in my bag was searched. Every inch of my body was patted down. 30 to 45 minutes, every flight. While the boarding pass in my hand was stamped with 4 letters SSSS that marked me as a suspected terrorist. A woman who had deployed to Iraq to fight terrorists was now classified as one. Mr. President, this was done under your authority. Not you personally in 2024, but the system you built, the infrastructure you expanded, the tools you created and left for every administration after you to inherit and use. In the gallery, Obama sat with his hands on his knees, the classic, relaxed, open presidential pose. But when Gabbard read the DHS memo statements critical of the current administration, his jaw shifted. Not a clench, a repositioning. The micro-movement of a man whose body registered an impact before his mind decided how to absorb it. He recrossed his legs, adjusted his jacket. Small movements, presidential movements, the movements of a man who spent decades managing his physical presentation in public. But the sum of the movements was greater than any one of them. They were the movements of discomfort, and in a man as physically controlled as Barack Obama, discomfort was news. Gabbard placed the DHS memo in a separate stack, the beginning of an evidence pile that would grow all morning. She removed a second document from the box. This one was thicker, several pages printed in color, with two parallel timelines arranged side by side. Document 2, she said. This was prepared by the ODNI Directors Initiatives Group at my request. It is a correlation analysis. She held it up so the committee and cameras could see. 2-column layout. Dates on the left, dates on the right, with colored lines connecting entries across the columns. Column 1 dates of meetings between senior White House political staff and IRS leadership during the period 2010 to 2012. These dates come from White House visitor logs, which are public record. Column 2 dates, on which new conservative organizations were added to the Alizon's enhanced scrutiny list, the targeting list that the Treasury Inspector General documented in his 2013 report. These dates come from the IGS evidence files. Now in ODNI custody, she ran her finger down the columns. Between March 2010 and April 2012, there were 14 meetings between White House political staff and IRS leadership. Within 2 weeks of 11 of those 14 meetings, new organizations were added to the enhanced scrutiny list. She looked up. 11 of 14. Mr. President Obama's right hand moved. The movement was small, his hand sliding from his knee to the armrest of his gallery chair, fingers curling around the wooden edge. He didn't know he was gripping it. The cameras knew. Now, I'm a DNI, not a prosecutor, Gabbard continued. Correlation is not causation. I understand that. But I can tell you, as someone whose professional life involves analyzing patterns in intelligence data, that an 11 of 14 correlation between White House meetings and IRS targeting actions would trigger a full counterintelligence investigation if it involved any foreign government on Earth. She set the timeline down. You told Bill O'Reilly in 2014 that there was not even a smidgen of corruption at the IRS. Mr. President, 11 of 14 meetings correlate with new targeting actions. That's not a smidgen. That is a pattern. She paused. And then, for the first and only time in the hearing, something resembling a smile crossed her face. Not warm, not amused, the grim half-smile of a soldier about to drop a piece of military wisdom. In the Army, we have a saying, once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is enemy action. She looked right at him. You had 11, document 3. Gabbard removed another set of pages. This one was sparser. A single authorization form dense with bureaucratic language, bearing the seal of the Department of Justice. This is the DOJ authorization to seize the telephone records of the Associated Press. Executed May 2012. It covered 20 phone lines home, cell, and work, used by over 100 AP reporters and editors. The seizure was conducted without notice, without negotiation, and without the courtesy that the DOJ's own internal guidelines required. She turned to a specific section. This document was classified for national security reasons. I've had it reviewed and partially declassified. Most of it is bureaucratic approval chains, routing numbers, the administrative machinery of surveillance, but there is one detail that has never been reported. She pointed to a spot on the page. In the margin of this authorization, handwritten, not typed. Someone wrote 6 words. She read them. Per WH Counsel, proceed without standard media notification. Approved at highest level. The hearing room went completely silent. Not the attentive silence of people listening. The shocked silence of people who just heard something they need a minute to process. Approved at highest level, Gabbard repeated. That is a handwritten annotation on a document authorizing the surveillance of over 100 American journalists. She looked at the committee. Mr. Chairman, I want to ask a question. Not a rhetorical question. A genuine one. Who is the highest level above the Attorney General of the United States? She let the question hang. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. No one answered, because everyone in the room knew the answer, and nobody wanted to say it out loud. And this wasn't the only case. Gabbard continued. James Rosen of Fox News. The DOJ tracked his movements, obtained his personal emails, and named him a criminal co-conspirator in a court filing. Not a suspect, not a person of interest. A criminal co-conspirator, a reporter, for talking to a source. The former president's administration prosecuted 8 people under the Espionage Act for communicating with journalists. 8. More than every previous president combined. George Washington through George W. Bush combined prosecuted fewer people under the Espionage Act for talking to reporters than Barack Obama did. She set down the authorization and picked up a list. I want to name them, Mr. Chairman, because numbers erase people, and I don't want these people erased. Thomas Drake, NSA senior executive who reported waste and mismanagement to Congress, charges eventually dropped to a misdemeanor. Career destroyed. Shammai Leibowitz, FBI translator who disclosed information about surveillance of a foreign embassy, sentenced to 20 months. Stephen Kim, State Department contractor who discussed a classified report about North Korea with a Fox News reporter, sentenced to 13 months. Chelsea Manning, Army intelligence analyst, sentenced to 35 years. 35 years. Mr. Chairman, for providing information to a journalist. John Kiriakou, CIA officer who confirmed the existence of waterboarding to a reporter, sentenced to 30 months. The only person connected to the CIA's torture program who went to prison, not for torturing anyone, but for telling a reporter that torture happened. Jeffrey Sterling, Donald Sackleben, Edward Snowden, charged in absentia, fled to Russia. 8 people, most of them career civil servants. Most of them believed they were doing the right thing. All of them prosecuted under a 1917 law written to catch German saboteurs, a law that had been used 3 times in 90 years before the Obama administration discovered it was the perfect tool for silencing people who talked to reporters. She turned toward the gallery. Mr. President, you said 5 minutes ago that you use the intelligence community as a shield, not a weapon. You used the Department of Justice to surveil 100 journalists, track the movements of a Fox News reporter, name that reporter a criminal co-conspirator in a federal court filing, and prosecute 8 Americans for the crime of telling reporters things the government didn't want reported. Using a World War I espionage law never intended for this purpose. John Kiriakou went to prison for confirming that the CIA used waterboarding. The people who actually conducted the waterboarding were never charged. Not one. The interrogators walked free. The lawyers who wrote the legal memos authorizing the torture walked free. The officials who approved the program walked free. The only person connected to the entire CIA enhanced interrogation program who went to prison was the man who told a reporter it happened. Mr. President, the torturer went free, and the man who said torture happened went to prison. Under your administration, with your Attorney General, in your Department of Justice, what would you call that? Obama leaned forward. The movement looked presidential, engaged, thoughtful, the posture of a man considering a serious question. But in body language, leaning forward in response to an accusation is not engagement, it's defense. His elbows were on his knees now. His fingers were interlaced. The famous thinking pose photographers captured 1,000 times in the Situation Room and the Oval Office. But the muscles in his forearms were tight, the tendons visible beneath the skin. He wasn't thinking. He was holding himself together. His former aide leaned toward him and whispered something. Obama nodded the automatic nod. The nod that means, I heard you. But I don't agree. He didn't whisper back. Document 4. The words changed the room, not because of what Gabbard said, but because of what she pulled out of the box. A single page, not a report, not a timeline, not an authorization form, a photocopy of a handwritten document, the kind of photocopy that preserves every pen stroke, every margin note, every coffee stain. These are CIA Director John Brennan's handwritten notes from his intelligence briefing to you, Mr. President. On the 28th of July 2016, Obama straightened in his chair. The movement was sharp, sharper than any previous adjustment. The movement of a man who just heard the name of a document he knows and did not expect to hear it in public. A portion of these notes has been previously declassified, she said. The American people already know that Brennan briefed you on what he described as Hillary Clinton's approval of a plan to vilify Donald Trump by stirring up a scandal, claiming interference by Russian security services. That portion was declassified years ago. Gabbard held up the photocopy. What has not been declassified until today is your response. She read slowly, word by word. Brennan's notes record your response as follows. POTUS asked how confident. I said, low confidence. Source is partisan. Chain is indirect. POTUS said proceed with caution, but do not shut down any investigative leads. She set the page on the table. Do not shut down any investigative leads. That was the sentence that has been redacted from every version of this document released to Congress, to the public, and to the courts for 8 years. Your administration classified it. The next administration kept it classified. It took my office, the office of a DNI you just called unqualified, to declassify it. Gabbard's voice was steady. The military register. Flat. Precise report mode. But beneath the steadiness was something harder. Something colder. Something the hearing room could feel the way a room can feel the temperature drop before a window breaks. Let me explain what this means, Mr. Chairman. In July 2016, the CIA director briefed the president that the Clinton campaign was manufacturing a political scandal, fabricating a narrative of Russian collusion to vilify a political opponent. Brennan told the president that the intelligence behind this assessment was low confidence, partisan source, indirect chain. The president's response was not inform the Trump campaign. It was not alert the FISA court that any warrant applications based on this material may be politically motivated. It was not shut this down before our intelligence agencies become tools of one political campaign against another. The president's response was, do not shut down any investigative leads. She looked at Obama. 3 months later, the FBI obtained a FISA warrant on Carter Page based on the Steele dossier. The dossier that Brennan had just told you was funded by the Clinton campaign. 4 months later, the FBI used a national security briefing of the Trump campaign to gather intelligence for Crossfire Hurricane, an operation you now knew was rooted in a political dirty trick. And within the first 126 days of the next administration, 125 classified intelligence items were leaked to the press, compared to 8 or 9 under your entire 8 years. You didn't pull every trigger, Mr. President, but you built the gun, you loaded it, you pointed it at a political opponent, and when your CIA director asked you what to do, you said, "Do not shut down." That's not a shield, Mr. President. That is a weapon, and you aimed it. Obama's left eyebrow moved, a fraction of an inch. The micro-expression of a man who heard something he didn't expect to hear read aloud. It was the only visible crack. The rest of his face held the composure, held the posture, but the eyebrow told the story that the rest of his body refused to tell. The story of a man who assumed that sentence would stay redacted forever, and had just heard it read on live television. His former aide passed him a note. Obama read it. His jaw tightened, the masseter muscles flexing visibly beneath the skin. The same micro-movement from document 1, but stronger now, more deliberate. The movement of a man clenching his teeth to keep his mouth closed. He folded the note and shoved it in his jacket pocket. He didn't write back. There was nothing to write. The sentence was out in the open now, and no note could take it back. Final document, Mr. President. Gabbard reached into the box one last time. What she removed wasn't a classified file, or a government memo, or a handwritten note. It was a printed sheet of paper from a word processor, single-spaced, with quotation marks visible from across the room. This one isn't classified. It's not from a sealed archive or a redacted file. It's from your own mouth. She read, the 29th of March, 2007, campaign speech, Washington, D.C. You said, "When I am president, we will have a government that is open and transparent. We will strengthen whistleblower laws to protect federal workers who expose waste, fraud, and abuse of authority." She looked up. You prosecuted 8 whistleblowers under the Espionage Act, more than every president before you combined. She returned to the page. The 2nd of October 2008. Presidential debate. You said, "We only have one president at a time. We should never use the instruments of government power against our political opponents." She glared at him. Your CIA director briefed you that the Clinton campaign was manufacturing a scandal against your political opponent as successor. Your response was, "Do not shut down any investigative leads." She turned the page. May 2018 speech at Rice University. You said, and the audience laughed, "I didn't have scandals," which seems like it shouldn't be something you brag about. Gabbard set the page down. They laughed, Mr. President, because they believed you, because you delivered it with enough charm and enough timing and enough of that smile that people decided believing you was easier than reading the documents. I've read the documents, Mr. President. All of them. Every file, every memo, every authorization, every margin note. And I can tell you, from the Quiet Skies memo that put me on a terrorist watch list for speaking on television, to the IRS timeline that shows 11 meetings correlating with 11 targeting actions, to the DOJ authorization that says approved at highest level, to Brennan's notes that record you saying, "Do not shut down any investigative leads about an investigation you knew was based on a political dirty trick." She paused. Let the list settle. You had scandals, Mr. President. You had plenty of them. You just had the eloquence to make people forget. The hearing room was incredibly still. Not the silence that follows an explosion. The silence that follows a brutal diagnosis. The silence of people who were just told something they suspected but never heard, stated plainly, by someone with the authority and the evidence to back it up. Obama looked at his hands. Not at Gabbard, not at the committee, not at the cameras. At his own hands, folded in his lap, fingers interlaced. The same position he held since Document 3. The man who had made eye contact with every audience, every interviewer, and every foreign leader for 30 years looked at his own hands the way a man looks at a tool he no longer knows how to use. His former aide touched his arm. Obama didn't respond. He was somewhere behind the mask, behind the eloquence, behind the charisma, in the place where a man goes when the things he said are played back beside the things he actually did, and the distance between them is measured in classified documents, handwritten notes, and the destroyed careers of 8 people who went to prison for talking to journalists. Gabbard turned back to the committee. Mr. Chairman, the former president called me unqualified. He said I was placed in this chair because of loyalty to one man. He questioned my fitness to lead the intelligence community. I'd like to tell the committee why I am in this chair. Her voice was totally different now. Not the military register. Something older. Something deeply personal. The voice of a woman who had carried a story for 20 years and was finally setting it down. I enlisted in the Hawaii Army National Guard in 2003, 2 years after September 11th. I was 21. I watched the towers fall on television in my dorm room, and I walked into a recruiting office 3 weeks later because I genuinely believed that when your country is attacked, you serve. I deployed to Iraq in 2004 with a medical unit. I earned a combat medical badge. I treated soldiers who were dying, boys, most of them 18 and 19 years old, bleeding out in the dirt. I went to Kuwait in 2008 as a military police officer. I served in Congress for 8 years. I served on the Armed Services Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee. I resigned as DNC Vice Chair in 2016 because I believed the primary process was corrupt, and the subsequent investigations proved I was absolutely right. I left the Democratic Party in 2022 because I believed it had been captured by forces that valued power over principle. And in 2024, the government I had served for 21 years, the government I had deployed to a combat zone to defend, put me on a terrorist watch list for speaking on television. She stood up. Not dramatically, functionally, the way a soldier stands when making a report. Straight back, shoulders square, chin level. The former president built the system that did that. He expanded the surveillance state. He weaponized the IRS against political opponents. He used the Department of Justice to spy on journalists. He prosecuted whistleblowers. He knew the Clinton campaign was manufacturing a political scandal and told the CIA director, "Do not shut down." And when it was all over, when the IRS commissioner had resigned, when the journalists' phone records had been seized, when 8 people had gone to prison, when a FISA warrant was obtained under false pretenses, when a sitting president had been subjected to a 2-year investigation based on fabricated intelligence, he stood in front of an audience and said, "I didn't have scandals," and they laughed. Gabbard looked at Obama directly. The dead-level look of a soldier facing a commanding officer. Not hostile, not pleading, just the look that says, "I see you clearly. I took an oath, Mr. President, the same oath every soldier takes, every member of Congress takes, every president takes, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I kept my oath, Mr. President." Pause. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Did you keep yours? The hearing room was dead silent. Obama didn't answer. He wasn't required to. He was a gallery guest, not a witness. But the question filled the room the way smoke fills a building after a fire, gradually curling into corners, settling into spaces, until the air itself felt completely different. And the only rational response was to decide whether you were going to stay or leave. Obama stayed. He was way too disciplined to leave, too experienced, too aware that standing up and walking out right then would be the clip, the only clip, the clip that would define the hearing and replace "Yes, we can" in the cultural memory. So he sat in his chair. He kept his hands folded. He kept his face as neutral as a face can be. When its owner just heard 7 words that he classified 8 years ago, read aloud on live television, followed by a question he cannot answer because every possible answer makes his life worse. He sat, he stayed, he endured, but the charisma was entirely gone. That invisible force that made people stand when he entered, that made cameras turn to him, that made audiences lean forward and reporters soften their questions. It was gone. What sat in that gallery chair wasn't the 44th President of the United States. It was just a man in a gray suit, with his hands folded and his eyes on the middle distance, waiting for the clock to run out so he could walk through a door. When the hearing finally broke for lunch 3 hours later, he stood up. He walked through the gallery, but not toward the main door. The door where the cameras waited, where the reporters gathered, and the microphones were lined up for posturing statements. He walked toward the side door, the staff door, the door without a nameplate that led to a service corridor. The exit members only used when they didn't want to be seen leaving. His Secret Service detail adjusted with a quick pivot, the fluid adaptation of professionals who protected him for 16 years and understood without being told that the route had abruptly changed. They followed him through the side door. It closed behind them with the soft institutional click of a government door doing its job. A single pool camera in the rear of the room caught the moment. Obama's back. The gray suit. The side door. The Secret Service detail. And then, nothing. Just a closed door and an empty gallery seat. The clip of Gabbard reading Brennan S. notes, "Do not shut down any investigative leads," was posted at 12:17 p.m. Eastern and hit 9 million views by 3:00 p.m. But that wasn't the most shared clip. The most shared clip was the side door, 12 seconds of footage. Obama standing, walking away from the main exit toward the side, the Secret Service adjusting, the door opening, the gray suit disappearing into a corridor. No words, no confrontation, just a man choosing a door that told the story his composure never would. Did you keep yours trended #1 within 30 minutes and stayed there for 18 solid hours? By evening, it was printed on T-shirts. By midnight, it was projected onto the side of a building in Nashville. By the following afternoon, a veteran in San Diego had it tattooed on his forearm. Obama's post-hearing statement dropped at 4:30 p.m. from a spokesperson. The former president's record speaks for itself. He will not dignify political theater with a response. The statement didn't address Brennan's notes. It didn't deny "do not shut down." It didn't address the IRS correlation. It didn't address the approved at highest level margin note. It didn't address the Quiet Skies memo. Within 48 hours, the House Judiciary Committee voted to formally refer the 11-14 IRS correlation timeline straight to the Department of Justice for investigation. The DOJ's Public Integrity Section opened a preliminary review of the AP phone records authorization, zeroing in on the handwritten margin note. 3 unnamed former Obama administration officials contacted committee staff independently to request proffer sessions, the legal term for preliminary cooperation negotiations you make when you anticipate serious criminal exposure. By the end of week 1, Obama canceled a scheduled keynote at a DNC fundraiser. Sources said he was consulting with his former Attorney General Eric Holder, who signed both the AP and Rosen authorizations and retained new criminal defense counsel separate from his existing legal team. John Brennan released a statement through his lawyer, claiming his briefing notes were accurate records of intelligence briefings conducted in accordance with established protocols. The statement completely failed to deny the content. Legal analysts pointed out that by confirming the notes were accurate records, Brennan's own attorney basically authenticated that the 7 words Gabbard read were 100% real. The Quiet Skies memo started its own cascade. The DHS Inspector General launched an investigation into Gabbard's enrollment. 3 federal air marshal whistleblowers were called to testify in a closed session before the Senate Homeland Security Committee. They reportedly exposed how the program's criteria had expanded since 2010 to target people based on criticism of government policy and association with political opposition figures, things that had nothing to do with problematic terrorism and everything to do with politics. By week 2, a federal grand jury was convened in D.C. to investigate the abuse of federal surveillance authorities for political purposes between 2010 and 2017. The Obama Foundation paused all new programming. Michelle Obama abruptly canceled 3 book tour appearances without explanation, and that side door clip just kept circulating. A veteran posted a viral side-by-side video Obama entering through the main door at 9:35 a.m., smiling, shaking hands, working the room, and Obama leaving through the side door at 1:15 p.m., totally alone, staring straight ahead, making 0 eye contact, no narration, no music, just the 2 doors. It hit 22 million views in 48 hours. Gabbard, for her part, stayed at that witness table for another 4 solid hours after Obama left. She methodically answered every single mundane question the committee asked about ODNI restructuring, budget allocation, and the declassification process. When a desperate Democratic member accused her of using the hearing as a platform for political vengeance, Gabbard adjusted her mic and completely shut him down. Congressman, I read 5 documents. 4 of them were produced by the government of the United States. The 5th was a printout of the former president's own speeches. I didn't write any of them. I didn't fabricate any of them. I found them, I declassified them, and I read them. If reading the government's own records into the congressional record is vengeance, then the vengeance was committed by the people who created the records, not by the woman who read them. At the Carl R. Darnell Army Medical Center in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb sat behind a government-issued desk in a room marked Behavioral Health. The television on the wall was tuned to the hearing. The 3 veterans who showed up for their appointments sat in plastic chairs along the opposite wall. They all wore that specific expression combat veterans wear in medical buildings, patient on the outside, vigilant underneath. Marcus had served in Iraq from 2004 to 2005. Different unit than Gabbard, same rotation. He never met her in theater, but he knew her the way veterans know other veterans. When Gabbard read that Quiet Skies memo out loud, statements critical of the current administration, Marcus looked at his waiting room. 3 chairs occupied, 12 completely empty. He knew exactly why those chairs were empty. He heard it every single week in the hallways, in the parking lot, in the phone calls he made to guys who scheduled appointments and then ghosted. The exact same words from different mouths. I don't trust them. What if they put something in my file?